Welcome to the Balanced Hustle podcast. I'm your host, Lindsay Sherman, fitness coach for burnt out perfectionist. If you're ready to break free from overwhelm, simplify your nutrition, and make fitness finally work for you instead of against you, you're in the right place. Each week, we'll dive into easy strategies to balance your health with your busy life. Let's hustle for balance, not burnout. Grab a seat and let's dive in. Hello and welcome to this week's podcast episode. Welcome back if you are a returning listener. Welcome if you are new here. This is about the sixth time that I have started this episode of the podcast, so I will not be restarting again unless I really majorly mess up. But if I stumble a little bit, we're just going to work through it. It is the end of the day. Typically, I do most of my work for my business in the mornings, but I like to record podcasts at the end of the day because I don't like to feel rushed on my way out the door. Most of you know I work a full-time job, and then I have my coaching business on top of my full-time job, and I don't like to feel rushed on the way out the door. So I typically record my podcast at night, but sometimes that means that my brain is a little fried from the day already. So that's a little bit of what we are dealing with today, but we are just going to power through. And today's podcast topic is a topic that's really near and dear to my heart. Today we are talking about the difference between burnout and stress and how to identify whether you are burnt out or whether you are stressed. And for those of you who know, this will be a little bit of a recap, but I'll try to make it quick. For those of you who don't know, I left my previous career. I was actually a assistant manager, basically, on a dairy farm, and that's what I went to school with. I got my degree in animal science. I studied dairy. That's what I thought I wanted to do. Got the position that I thought that I ideally wanted. Ended up completely burning myself out, spiraling, and then following my passion for fitness, which I had for many, many, many years. I've been in fitness for about 10 years now, but I just never thought I could make that my career path. I always thought that kind of had to be my hobby, kind of had to be my passion. But this, after I burnt myself out completely, I decided to follow this passion. And now I'm here helping you make sure that you don't do the same and you don't completely burn yourself out. And if you are, how to recognize that. And then once we recognize it, we can push through that, right? So that's why this podcast is called the Balanced Hustle Podcast, because it's not about not hustling. It's not about not going for the things that you want and not working hard, because I definitely still do that, but it's about doing it in a balanced way where you don't burn yourself out in the process, because once you burn yourself out, you stop making that progress towards the goals that you are trying to achieve, and you start to go backwards. So I actually picked up this book. Some of you, if you've been following my Instagram, know that I've been very into reading again lately. And I used to read a ton as a kid. We had those, I forget what it was called. I think it was called the Ravenous Reader, where you earned points for reading. And the longer the book, the more points you earn. So if you read Harry Potter, you got more points for reading Harry Potter, stuff like that. And you would continue to earn points, and then you would get prizes, and you'd be put up on a leaderboard. And I forget the top 3 people in the grade, or maybe in the elementary school. This was a 5th, 6th grade thing, I think, from what I remember. You won something at the end of the year, and there was always 3 people in the class that were really into it. And I was one of them. So I used to be, long story short, I used to be a huge reader. And then I kind of got out of it when I went to college. I remember having one novel that I read in college, in the 2 years I was in college, which was kind of unfortunate because college is really a time when I was going to say you have more time to read, not saying you're not busy. You obviously have studying to do, but you don't have other kind of responsibilities. Like right now, like I have a house and I have dogs and things like that. Like when you're not in class or studying or hanging out with friends, it's a really good time to read. So I got out of it in college though, just because I got caught up with studying, hanging out with friends, and that was totally fine. No regrets there. But I just got back into reading recently in about the last year, and then this year I started a Goodreads account, and I'm actually tracking my reading for the first time since I was in elementary school, or is it intermediate? I think it's intermediate school. Whatever. Doesn't matter. But so I'm reading again. Long story short, I am reading again, and I have a few books started all at the same time. I'm very much a mood reader, so I typically have a romance book going because I love romance. That's my favorite genre. Or right now I just finished Fourth Wing, so I guess you could count that as like a fantasy romance. So I typically have a fiction book going. Try to keep it to one fiction book. And then I like to have kind of like a self-improvement book, a couple educational books going on the side. And those are very mood dependent for me. Currently, I think I have 4 books. Well, 3 books, because I just finished Fourth Wing, and I ordered Iron Flame, the next book in the trilogy, if you're not aware, and then I ordered the third one, because I just know that I'm going to like the next one. And so anyway, that's like my fiction book right now. Then I'm reading a self-improvement book. It's called By Yourself, the Effing Lilies. I just had to decide if I'm going to swear or not on this podcast. I don't know if I've sworn. I definitely swear in real life, but I don't know if I've sworn on the podcast yet. So anyway, that's the self-improvement book I'm reading. And then I started 2 more. So I'm also currently reading a finance book. And then the whole point of me telling you about all these books was I'm reading another book called The Trauma of Burnout. And again, my nonfiction books are very mood dependent. Like I could get very hyper fixated on one fiction book, and then my nonfiction books, I read, a chapter here and there from each when I am in the mood to digest it and kind of take notes. I've recently started tabbing and marking pages. I don't really do that with fiction books, just with nonfiction so far. But so I'm currently reading this book called The Trauma of Burnout. I haven't gotten very far. In fact, I've only read the introduction thus far, but I really wanted to talk about it in this podcast as we talk about burnout, because when I read the introduction to this book, I connected with it so hard. Like I wanted to highlight every single thing. And I thought that it might be very valuable for you to hear if you are kind of in this stage where you are not sure if you are stressed, if you're burnt out, if you don't know what your next move is, but you know that you're kind of unhappy or things need to change. I thought this might be really helpful because I wish I had this book. Again, I've only read the introduction so far, but I wish I would have had this book when I was in that burnt out stage, and I haven't even finished it yet. So I'm recommending it before I've even finished it. But let's talk about a little bit about what I read in the introduction that really clicked with me and connected with me. So I'm gonna quote this book a lot. So again, it's called The Trauma of Burnout, and it's by Dr. Claire Plumley, who is a clinical psychologist. So I'm going to quote it a lot, so I want you guys to know that. Again, The Trauma of Burnout, Dr. Claire Plumley, clinical psychologist. So if you want to look it up, if you want to read it yourself, and also just so you know that I am citing my sources here. So the beginning, the introduction, talks about how they're talking about this girl named Sarah, who is, let me see, I read this a few days ago, but so Sarah currently feels like her mind is never switched off, which just from that, I'm like, I know exactly what you mean. Like, I get Sarah. I know Sarah. I was Sarah. Like, I so get that. Feels like her mind is never switched off. And then she says, with thoughts jumping haphazardly between things she had to do and failing to settle on any one of them long enough to form a plan. For weeks, she hadn't been able to stay focused on things as she trudged through the front door, passing all the half-finished jobs that lay scattered around her house, her partner called. So just kind of introducing Sarah, the mental state that she's at, and I just connected with this so hard of having that feeling, and maybe you'll understand this too, having that feeling of having all these things going on in your brain and you just can't figure out where to go next, and you're like paralyzed. And it's like all these things are rushing around your head. And I've tried to explain this to my husband before, more so back when I was in that stage of burnout, less so now. And just being upset and being angry at points because I have all these things going on in my head and feeling like nobody understood it. And then, so as I'm thinking that, the next line says, we're talking about how her partner called and he asked if she could pick up dinner on her way home. And then it says, another demand, why always me? Everyone seems to need a piece of me all of the time. She goes on to talk about how she, I guess she's a teacher. I forgot that part. I guess she's a teacher. She shouldn't have snapped at that student today. She just has too much to do and never enough time. And that was me, again, that was me when I was in my old position and I was really burnt out. And one thing that I've recognized has contributed to that, or did contribute to that, was my inability to say no to things. And a lot of the time we feel like we have to say yes to everything. And then it creates this issue, right? Where we've got all these things going on. We're so overwhelmed. We think we can handle them until we snap at our partner, or, we get asked to do one more thing and that pushes us over the edge. And then all of a sudden we're crying, we're upset, and we're spiraling. We don't know what to do, right? And the book goes on to talk about this a little bit more, saying that she's busier than ever without the enthusiasm that used to fuel her, feeling overstretched. And then I love this next line because she's talking about it in terms of work, right? And then guess what her management says? They say, but this is what the job entails, Sarah. Would you like HR to send you some advice on time management? Like, oh my gosh, I have been there. I have so been there. And I'm going to tell a story. So there was a point in my previous role, the role that I'm talking about when I was super burnout, when I was struggling. I was clearly struggling to do my job in the to the expectations that were expected of me, no matter how hard I tried to make it happen. And there was one point where my boss asked me to go home and to write a list of everything that I thought was my responsibility. That was overwhelming me, right? And so I went home and I wrote this list. And I can't remember, I think it was a full page. I can't remember if it went on to the back. It was a very long list, okay? It was at least a full page. I wrote a full page of everything that I felt responsible for on a day-to-day basis. And as I'm writing this list, I'm thinking, oh my gosh, how could you possibly expect somebody, and no less somebody who is, I'm gonna be honest, getting paid what I was getting paid was not very much. I said, or thought to myself, how could you honestly expect somebody who is, at that time I was 21, 22 years old, to be responsible for this many things, for all of these things on a daily basis? My mind was blown because I had never sat down and wrote it all out before. I had never done that. I'd always had all these thoughts swimming in my head. And this is also a good plug for journaling and why I like journaling, because sometimes it's just to get these thoughts out of your head and then you feel so much better, right? Except in this case, I did not end up feeling better, because what happened was I had all these thoughts that I wrote down, all these responsibilities, and I was honest. I wrote down everything that I felt responsible for, even if it felt like a stretch, even if it felt like it should be someone else's responsibility. But I felt like I took the fall if it wasn't to be done right. I wrote down everything, right? Then I went back to work and my boss asked me for my list, right? And I hand him the list and I'm laughing because it's so absurd to me now, and it didn't hit me like it should have in the moment. I hand my boss this list and I'm almost embarrassed to give it to him. I almost feel like I maybe have gone too far. Like I've assumed I'm responsible for too much. Like maybe I'm being a little silly even, that I've written some of these things down. But I'm like, he asked, so I show it to him. And he takes a look at it, reads it over, in very awkward silence. And then he looks at me and he goes, okay, yep, this seems like a pretty good list. Seems like kind of all the things I expect you to be responsible for. Which, surprises me, because I feel like maybe I stretch things a little bit, but I'm like, okay, I did write it down. Maybe, I was right that I felt responsible for this. And then he asked me, he goes, does this feel like it's too much? Does this feel like it's making it difficult for you to do your job the correct way, to focus? Does this feel like too much? And in my head, I'm thinking, of course it does. This feels insane, right? This is crazy. Like, I wrote out, again, this whole page of things on a daily basis that I feel responsible for, and it's insane. But that's not what I said. What I said was, no, I think it's okay. I said I thought it was okay, and then we moved on, and that was it. And I did not know how to say, yes, this is too much, or no, I cannot have all of this on my plate, because it prevents me from doing things well. Instead, I just said, yes, I can do all of this, and I figured I would just have to figure out how I could do it in a way where my work wouldn't suffer and that I would be able to please everybody. So if you kind of feel like you're in the same scenario, you could try that exercise, even if you don't show it to anybody, or try journaling and just kind of see what kind of reaction to that you have. Doesn't have to be in your workplace, doesn't have to be with your job. It could be with home chores, really anything. Maybe you're on a board, or serving in a volunteer or leadership position somewhere, and you feel like you're being stretched a little thin. It could be an exercise that you could do with really anything. So then, moving on from that, I get to this point in this book where they talk about how burnout is different from stress. And I really, really liked the explanation that they gave, because at this point, if we go back to me writing that list, we can still have different opinions about what that scenario was. Was that burnout? Was it stress? But this explanation really explains the difference between the two in a really clear way that I thought was really useful. So I'm just going to read the paragraph, and I'll break it up as I read it, but it's not too long. And it starts by saying, when our personal and work lives are relentlessly demanding, we become stretched. Okay, that makes sense, right? We have demands, we become stretched. Like an elastic band, we have the capacity to stretch quite some way. In fact, stress can be a positive, healthy experience when there's the right amount, when we feel in control, and importantly, when it has an endpoint. So I'm going to stop right there and say that is a huge thing, when it has an endpoint. So if we think about, like, if you are in college and you have an assignment, you have a paper due, you have stress, but it has an endpoint. You have a work task that maybe you have a big project at work, you have an event at work coming up, maybe you're a little stressed, but it has an endpoint. Burnout does not have an endpoint. So the next sentence says, but when stress is inescapable, then we are stretched to maximum for too long, causing our nervous systems to get stuck in survival mode. The impact of this on our emotions, thoughts, body, and behavior is the experience of burnout. So I think that's such a great explanation on what the difference is. Think about, am I stressed right now because I have something that's kind of unusual, that's maybe a special circumstance, I have a project that has an endpoint, or am I burnout? Have I been spiraling for quite some time? Does it have an end in sight? Or am I just expecting this to keep going until who knows when, right? That is a question that you need to be asking yourself to determine which one of the two you are dealing with. Then it goes on to say, essentially, healthy stress is an energized experience, which I also thought was really interesting, because if you've ever experienced stress in that kind of healthy way, it can almost feel like an adrenaline rush. And that might sound a little bit crazy, but like when you have a project and you're stressed for a little bit, but then you accomplish it, or you have an event and you're stressed to plan it, and then it all works out, it's exciting. Like, it's a rush. You're like, wow, I did it. It paid off. It can be an energizing experience. But then the next thing that it says is burnout is often a hollow experience, a feeling like we've given all we have and now are running on empty. So that's another key difference that I want you to look at. Number one, does what I'm dealing with right now have an endpoint? And number two, is it an energizing experience for me, or am I left with a hollow, running on empty experience at the end? That is another key difference. And it's really important to recognize that difference between the two, because as the next paragraph goes on to say, and this is, again, why I love this book, because it's really hitting the nail on the head. When we are experiencing that burnout, we can feel emotionally blunted, cynical, unsure of ourselves, detached from the people and activities that used to light us up, and there is no end. It's just a functional decline, and we just keep going, again, because there is no end point, until eventually our brain or body forces us to stop in the form of a physical, mental illness, or both. It talks about loss of your sense of identity. It makes it harder for you to problem solve, make rational decisions, and generally do the self-care that you so desperately need. And that's a whole domino effect, because what you need is that self-care. What you need is that time to recharge, to refocus, to start filling your cup again. If it's something like working out, eating right, just taking time to relax, to read, hang out with family, that is going to help you dig yourself out of that burnout. But you can't physically do it while you're in burnout, and it's ultimately also not the answer, right? We have to cut off the source of the burnout, and if you can't even do some of the basic things that make you feel better while you're in this state, it's even harder to cut off the source. So the first thing that we have to do is recognize which one it is, because most of the time our brains want us to go into denial mode, and our brains want to tell us that it's fine, everything's fine, we can handle the, whatever load that we're carrying at the moment, that we can serve everybody that needs to be served, say yes to all the people that we feel like we need to say yes to, and we don't want to admit that we cannot, because it's almost like admitting defeat. It's like admitting a weakness. And if you are like me, that's the last thing you want to do, right? If you are that type A people pleaser, perfectionist, you were probably a straight A student in school, that is the last thing you want to do, is admit that you can't do something, that you can't handle something. And that's what people who really feed into your burnout feed off of, because they know that about you, and they know that you are just going to keep saying yes, and you are going to do what they ask of you. And it's not always from a place of cynicism or intentionally trying to harm you, but it's just natural for them to continue to ask things of you when they know that you are always going to say yes. So first, recognizing whether you are stressed, whether it's just for a short period of time, whether there's an end in sight, whether this is something that's feeding you, giving you energy, that's just a temporary thing that kind of ebbs and flows, or are you in this state of burnout, and do we need to fix it? And one of the things that I would highly recommend, and we won't go into all of the things that you could do to fix burnout in this episode, because that's a whole other episode in itself, but if you are going to do one thing, what I would recommend after asking yourself these questions is find someone who can support you, and who will support you, and who will help you answer these honestly. Maybe you can answer them honestly for yourself right now. Maybe you need somebody who's looking in from the outside to help you answer these things. Find someone who you trust, who can support you, who can listen to what you're feeling in a way that's objective. Some people are not always the right people. Some people just want to kind of feed off of misery. They want to kind of make things bigger than they are. Maybe this is just stress, and this is just a momentary thing, and you need someone who's supportive. But maybe it is burnout, and you need somebody who's going to be honest with you and tell you that they notice that things may need to change. What you're looking for is someone who can listen to you, who can be a neutral third party to the situation, and who can say and remind you when you start to kind of fool yourself, and when you start to say, oh, maybe it's not so bad. In the case of burnout, we often start to tell ourselves those, kind of cover up some of those lies again. Oh, it's not so bad. I had that conversation with my boss, and I'm really not as upset about it as I thought that I was. And someone who can say, but you were upset about it, and it did make you feel this way, and you did come talk to me about it, and I'm noticing that this is a repeating pattern. Someone who can just point out these trends and kind of help you notice what's happening, whether it's, again, something that's just stress and that's going to pass, and something that is burnout that really needs kind of a deeper solution. That is one of my number one tips, is finding someone who can support you through that and just help you notice those trends objectively, who's not going to try to really push you or tell you what to do, who can recommend, their feedback and their thoughts, but someone who's not just going to maybe force you into a decision that you don't want to make just to give you a quick answer. This still has to come from you and has to be your reasoning, your rationalizing your decision, but it can help to have that third party to provide some outside feedback. So I hope this episode was helpful. If you are currently in a space where you're trying to decide if you are stressed, if you are burnout, if something needs to change, what needs to happen. And I know that I've been through it myself before, and now I can definitely see the difference between the two. And I just really want to help other women recognize that difference before it gets to the point of where I was at, right? And if you've been burnout, you've been to that point before, where you're coming home completely drained, completely exhausted. Again, like we talked about, that loss of identity, that loss of sense of self. You're disconnected from your family. Maybe if you are in a similar situation as me, you're coming home in tears, from work every day, things like that. I want to help you stop it before it gets to that point. So if this episode was helpful, go ahead, share it with a friend. Maybe you have a friend who you think needs to hear this. Leave me a comment. I love hearing your comments. And you can also connect with me over on Instagram too at @LindsaySherman_fitness. Thank you so much for tuning in to the Balanced Hustle podcast. If today's episode resonated with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Be sure to leave a review or share with someone who needs a little extra balance in their hustle. For more tips, tools, and resources to help you reclaim your energy and build the strong, vibrant life you deserve, follow me on Instagram at LindsaySherman_fitness, and don't forget to subscribe here so you don't miss a single episode. Until next time, remember, progress is always better than perfection. Keep taking those small steps. They'll tell you exactly where you need to go. Talk soon.